The great trade station called Starhaven floated like a shining crown in the orbit of a blue star. It was one of the busiest places in the sector, filled with travelers, merchants, workers, and wanderers from hundreds of species. Its corridors were alive with glowing lights, the hum of engines and the sound of many languages mixing together. In the middle of this sea of life, one figure stood apart. His name was Zirak. Zirak was not just another traveler. He was an alien billionaire known across many star systems. His wealth came from rare crystal mining, trade networks, and building star fleets for governments. But his presence did not only come from money. He carried himself with calm authority, and his tall frame, silver skin, and glowing eyes made others step aside when he walked through the markets. He rarely wasted his time wandering through the crowded station, but on this day, something drew him to the lower districts. As he walked past stalls selling food, fabrics, and small machines, Zirak's eyes caught a glint of light. A poor human worker was bending near a broken supply cart trying to fix its wheel. The worker looked tired, dressed in worn clothes, his hands stained with grease from years of hard labor. He was not someone the crowds noticed, yet Zirak's attention was pulled to him at once. Around the worker's wrist, fastened with care, was a bracelet. It was not just a bracelet made of metal or plastic like the ones sold in the markets. It was crafted from a rare crystal alloy, glowing faintly with inner light. The design was old, elegant, and unmistakable. Zirak stopped walking. He remembered that bracelet. It had been many years ago, almost forgotten in the passage of time. Back then, Zirak was younger, less powerful, and struggling to survive political enemies who wished him dead. He had traveled in secret to a small blue planet, Earth, hiding from hunters who tracked him across the stars. On that world, he had been saved by a kind human family. They had hidden him, fed him, and kept him safe when he had nothing to give in return. Out of gratitude, Zirak had given them a gift, his personal bracelet made of crystal alloy and encoded with his family seal. It was more than jewelry. It was a mark of trust, something priceless. And now, after all these years, Zirak was looking at the same bracelet again, but on the wrist of a poor human worker. Zirak's heart, usually steady and cold in business matters, beat faster. How could this be possible? Did this human know what he was wearing? Or was it simply an old heirloom passed down without meaning? The worker did not notice Zirak staring. He kept working, tightening bolts on the cart. A merchant shouted at him to hurry. The worker nodded quickly, trying his best. Zirak noticed the way the human moved. Tired but determined. Careful even though he was rushed. For a moment, Zirak felt the urge to approach directly and ask about the bracelet. But his instinct told him not to. If the worker did not know its value, asking too soon could bring danger to him. There were thieves, spies, and greedy merchants all over the station. If they learned the truth, the poor worker would be in great trouble. Zirak decided to wait. He called one of his silent guards, a tall being covered in dark armor, and gave a small signal. The guard understood at once. They would follow the human quietly, gather information, and report back. Zirak himself walked away, blending back into the flow of the station's crowd, but his thoughts did not leave the bracelet. Later that night, in his private chamber aboard his luxury cruiser, Zirak received the first report. The human's name was Tom. He was not a traveler or merchant, but a repair worker who had lived on the station for many years. He earned small wages fixing old freighters and supply carts. He rented a single room near the lower decks where light barely reached. His record showed no crime, no family connections on the station, and no history of wealth. The only unusual thing about him was the bracelet he always wore. Zirak sat back in his chair, thinking deeply. If this was truly the same bracelet, then Tom must be connected to the family who once saved him on Earth. But how? Generations could have passed since that time. Perhaps Tom was a grandson or even further down the line. The thought brought something rare to Zirak's mind. Memories. He remembered the face of the woman who had given him shelter in her small home. He remembered the warm food she shared, the laughter of her child, and the way they risked themselves to protect a stranger from the stars. He remembered placing the bracelet into her hands, telling her it was a promise that if her family ever needed him, the seal on the bracelet would bring his protection. And now here was Tom, poor, unnoticed, and struggling. Did he even know the weight of the promise around his wrist? The next day, Zirak disguised himself in simple robes and returned to the lower decks. He walked past the crowds until he reached the repair bay where Tom worked. The place was noisy, filled with broken machines and half-fixed ships. Sparks flew from welding torches and the air smelled of burnt metal. Tom was there again, bent over a damaged panel. Sweat ran down his face and his hands moved quickly with tools. He paused for a moment to wipe his brow, and again the bracelet shone faintly in the light. Xerac stepped closer, watching carefully. The merchant who owned the repair bay shouted at Tom to finish faster. Tom nodded, kept working, and did not complain. His movements were steady, though his back looked tired. Xerac saw in him the same spirit he had once admired on Earth. Quiet strength. Silent endurance. For hours, Xerac observed. He did not speak, only watched how Tom carried himself. The more he saw, the more certain he became that this man was connected to the past. The bracelet was not just a random object. It was a thread linking history across generations, binding his fate with the fate of this poor human. When Tom finally finished his shift, he walked out of the repair bay, carrying a small bag of food. He took the long road back to the lower decks, through narrow corridors and flickering lights. Xerac followed at a distance, his guard keeping watch from behind. Tom entered his room. It was small, barely enough space for a bed and a small table. He placed the food on the table, sat down, and for a long while just looked at the bracelet on his wrist. His fingers traced its edges as if it gave him comfort. Xerac felt his chest tighten. He had been right. The bracelet was not just worn for decoration. Tom cared for it. The billionaire turned away before Tom could notice him at the doorway. He had seen enough for now. The time to reveal the truth had not yet come. He would need to be careful. He would need to learn more about Tom's life, his heart, and his worth. Only then could the promise of the bracelet be fulfilled. And so the alien billionaire who owned fleets and fortunes greater than kingdoms decided to watch over a poor human worker. Not for profit, not for business, but because of a bond forged long ago on a small blue world. A bond carried in the shape of a glowing bracelet. It was the beginning of something neither Tom nor the galaxy yet understood. The next morning on Starhaven Station began as it always did. Lights brightened across the massive corridors to imitate sunrise. Merchants unlocked their stalls. Ships came and went from the docking arms, and workers hurried to their stations. Among them was Tom. He woke early, washed quickly at the corner sink in his room, and left for work carrying the same small bag of tools he had carried for years. The bracelet on his wrist glimmered faintly, as if greeting the light of the day. Tom walked through the narrow halls, nodding politely to other workers. Most of them did not notice the bracelet, for they only saw him as another poor mechanic. To them, Tom was an ordinary man who fixed broken machines and earned barely enough credits to survive. But in truth, he carried something priceless on his arm. From the shadows, Xerac's silent guard followed at a distance. Xerac himself had remained aboard his luxury cruiser, studying the reports gathered overnight. He had ordered his men to collect every scrap of information about Tom's life. He wanted to know where he came from, how long he had lived on Starhaven, and most of all, how the bracelet had reached his hands. By midday, the first full report reached him. Tom had been born on a small colony near Earth's sector, a mining world where life was hard and resources were few. His parents had died when he was young, leaving him with his grandmother. She had raised him with stories of Earth and old family legends. When she passed away, she left him only one possession, the bracelet. Tom had never sold it, no matter how poor he became. He had chosen instead to keep it close, believing it was special, though he never truly understood why. Xerac read the report with great interest. His memory sharpened. He remembered giving the bracelet to a human woman long ago, a woman who had helped him survive during a dangerous time. Could that woman have been Tom's grandmother or perhaps her mother? The timeline was blurred, but the connection was clear. Later that evening, Xerac returned to the lower decks in disguise. He walked quietly into the repair bay, just as Tom was finishing work on an old freighter's navigation panel. Sparks flew as Tom tightened the last bolt and tested the system. The panel lit up and the ship's captain gave a nod of approval before tossing him a few credits. Tom thanked him politely and wiped the sweat from his forehead. His hands were scarred from years of work, but his movements showed skill. Xerac stepped closer, his hood pulled low to hide his face. "Hard day?" Xerac asked in a calm voice. Tom looked up in surprise. Strangers did not often speak to him. Every day is like this, he said, trying to smile. But the ships keep breaking and someone has to fix them. Zirak's eyes moved to the bracelet. That is an interesting piece you wear. Where did you find it? Tom's smile faded. He held his wrist closer to his body as if protecting it. It was a gift, he said softly. From whom? Zirak pressed gently. Tom hesitated. For a moment he looked like he wanted to stay silent. But then he sighed. From my grandmother. She gave it to me before she passed away. She said it came from a stranger long ago. She never told me more, only that it must never leave our family. Zirak felt a rush of memory. The words were true. He had told the woman on Earth that the bracelet was not to be sold or traded, but to be kept as a mark of his respect. Hearing Tom repeat this made his chest tighten. Do you know what it means? Zirak asked. Tom shook his head. No, to me it is only a memory of her. When times are hard, I look at it and feel stronger. It reminds me that she believed our family once did something good, something worth remembering. I never understood what it was. Zirak studied the human carefully. There was no greed in his words, no sign that he wanted to sell the bracelet for riches. He wore it not for value but for meaning. That alone told Zirak much about his character. Before Tom could ask further questions, the merchant who owned the repair bay shouted for him to bring tools. Tom excused himself quickly and hurried back to work. Zirak did not stop him. Instead, he stepped aside and left quietly, deep in thought. That night, back in his chamber, Zirak remembered more of his past. He remembered fleeing across alien skies, hunted by rivals who wanted him dead. He remembered collapsing near a small human home on Earth, wounded and weak. The woman who lived there had taken him in, cared for his wounds, and kept his presence a secret even when soldiers searched nearby. Her kindness had saved his life. Before leaving Earth, he had given her the bracelet. It carried not only his seal, but also a hidden code that could one day call upon his protection. He had told her that if her family was ever in danger, the bracelet would bring aid. Now, generations later, the bracelet had found its way to Tom. And Tom, though poor and unnoticed, carried himself with quiet strength that reminded Zirak of the same family courage he had once known. In the following days, Zirak ordered his men to continue observing. They learned more about Tom's life. He worked long hours but earned little. At night, he often read from an old datapad his grandmother had left him, filled with simple stories and lessons. He rarely joined the gambling halls or bars where other workers wasted their credits. Instead, he lived humbly, saving what little he could. One evening, Zirak entered the repair bay again. This time he spoke more openly. You work with great skill. Have you ever thought of leaving this place? Tom laughed softly. Leave? Where would I go? This station is all I know. No one would hire a poor mechanic from the lower decks. Perhaps someone would, Zirak said. Tom frowned, studying the hooded stranger. Why do you ask me these things? Because I see something in you, Zirak answered. You carry yourself with honor. Not many do that here. Tom said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at the bracelet again. My grandmother used to say that honor was the only treasure worth keeping. I did not understand when I was a child, but now I think I do. Without honor, we are nothing. Zirak felt a rare warmth in his chest. The words were true, and they came not from wealth or power, but from the simple wisdom of a poor human. Before leaving, Zirak made a silent decision. He would not only learn Tom's story, but also test him. The bracelet was a promise, and promises must be honored. If Tom was worthy, Zirak would reveal the truth. That night, as the station lights dimmed to imitate nightfall, Zirak stood by the window of his cruiser, watching the stars beyond. He whispered to himself, the family kept their promise. Now it is my turn to keep mine. And in the quiet of the station, Tom sat in his small room, unaware that his life was about to change forever. The days on Starhaven Station passed in their usual rhythm, yet Tom's life was beginning to change in ways he did not yet understand. The mysterious hooded figure who often spoke with him at the repair bay had not revealed his true identity, but his words had stayed in Tom's mind. Honor, skill, and the idea that perhaps he was worth more than just another poor mechanic. These thoughts lingered as he worked through long hours. One evening, after Tom finished repairing a ship engine, the stranger appeared again. This time he spoke with purpose. You have skill, the stranger said, but skill hidden in shadows serves no one. I can offer you a chance. Will you take it? Tom hesitated. His life had always been simple. Work, food, rest, and survival. He had never been offered anything greater. What kind of chance? He asked carefully. The stranger's glowing eyes flashed faintly from under his hood. A chance to work beyond these narrow halls. A chance to prove yourself among the best builders in the stars. Tom was silent. Part of him wanted to refuse. He feared stepping beyond the only life he knew. Yet another part of him, the part that carried his grandmother's words and the weight of the bracelet, told him to listen. I will try, Tom finally said. The stranger nodded once. Good. Meet me tomorrow at Dock 7. When morning came, Tom packed his tools, unsure of what awaited him. At Dock 7, a sleek silver ship stood ready, unlike anything he had ever seen. The hooded stranger was waiting. Come, he said, leading Tom aboard. Inside, the ship was filled with luxury and advanced design. Lights glowed softly, air was clean and fresh, and corridors stretched wide. Tom followed silently, his eyes wide with awe. At last, they entered a chamber where armored guards stood at attention. As Tom looked around, the stranger removed his hood. Tom froze. Before him stood Zirak, the billionaire whose name echoed across star systems. He had seen pictures of him in news screens, always surrounded by wealth and power. Now he was face to face with him. You are Zirak, Tom stammered. Yes, Zirak answered calmly. And you are Tom, the one who carries the bracelet. Tom instinctively touched the band on his wrist. You know of it? Zirak's eyes softened. More than you can imagine. But for now, you do not need to understand everything. What you need to know is that I have chosen you for a task. Tom swallowed nervously. Why me? I am just a worker. Because you are more than you believe, Zirak said. I wish to see what you can do when given the chance. You will work with my engineers on one of my star projects. If you succeed, doors will open that you never dreamed of. If you fail, you may return to your old life no worse than before. Tom thought for a long moment. He remembered his grandmother's words about honor, and he looked down at the bracelet. Then he nodded. I will try. Zirak gave a small smile. That is all I ask. The journey took them to a massive shipyard orbiting a gas giant. From the viewing deck, Tom saw enormous vessels under construction, their skeletons stretching across the stars. Hundreds of workers and machines moved like ants, welding, fitting, and assembling. It was a sight beyond anything Tom had ever imagined. Zirak led him to a group of alien engineers. They were tall, with different skin colors, shapes, and languages. Some had multiple arms, others glowing eyes, and all of them carried advanced tools. They looked at Tom with suspicion. This human will work with you, Zirak said. He will not be treated as less than any of you. Watch him. Learn from him as he learns from you. The engineers exchanged doubtful glances. One of them, a scaled being named Vorin, muttered, A human from the lower decks? He will only slow us down. Zirak's gaze turned sharp. Judge him not by where he comes from, but by what he does. If he fails, I will see it myself. With that, he left Tom among the engineers. The first day was hard. The aliens spoke in technical terms Tom struggled to follow. They worked quickly, expecting him to keep up. Tom tried his best, but his tools were different, and the machines were more advanced than anything he had touched before. He made mistakes, dropped parts, and earned sighs of frustration from Vorin. At night, Tom lay in the small quarters given to him, feeling defeated. But then he looked at the bracelet. He remembered how his grandmother had told him to never give up, even when things seemed impossible. The next day, he woke early and reviewed the schematics alone before the others arrived. Slowly, he began to learn. Days turned into weeks. Tom worked harder than anyone. He asked questions, observed carefully, and tested new methods. When something broke, instead of giving up, he searched for simple solutions. Where alien engineers relied on expensive tools, Tom often used creativity, patching systems with basic materials in ways that surprised even the most skilled among them. One day, a critical system failed on a nearly completed ship. The cooling unit for the engine was damaged and replacements were delayed. The engineers argued, unable to move forward. Vorin claimed they should halt the entire project. Tom studied the system quietly. Then he spoke. We can redirect the flow using auxiliary pipes. If we reroute the coolant through the secondary chamber, it will stabilize until the replacement arrives. Vorin scoffed. That will never hold. Let me try, Tom insisted. With Zarek watching from above, Tom worked quickly, adjusting valves and sealing gaps with material he found on hand. The system hummed, sputtered, then settled into a steady rhythm. The engine glowed blue, stable once again. The engineers stared in silence. Zarek's eyes gleamed with quiet pride. "Sometimes the simplest path is the strongest," Tom said softly, wiping his hands. From that day on, the engineers began to respect him. Voran still doubted him, but even he could not deny Tom's skill. The human had shown that creativity mattered as much as knowledge. Zarek continued to observe, saying little but watching everything. Each success Tom achieved confirmed what he already suspected, that the spirit of the human family who once saved him still lived strong in their descendant. As weeks passed, Tom grew in confidence. He no longer felt like just a poor mechanic from the lower decks. He was part of something greater, part of a team building ships that would shape the galaxy. And yet he remained humble. He still wore the bracelet every day, never forgetting where he came from. One evening, as Tom was finishing work, the bracelet began to glow faintly. It had never done this before. The light pulsed softly as if alive. Tom stared at it, confused. The engineers noticed but said nothing. From the shadows above, Zarek's heart stirred. He alone knew what the glow meant. The bracelet's hidden code was awakening, recognizing that its bearer was proving worthy. The promise he had made long ago was alive once more. The test was far from over. Challenges still lay ahead and rivals waited to strike. But in that moment, Zarek knew one thing for certain. Tom was not ordinary. He was the living answer to a promise, and the galaxy would soon see it too. The weeks of training and hard work passed quickly. Tom had earned a place among the alien engineers, and though he still struggled at times, he was no longer the outsider many had believed him to be. Even Vorin, who had doubted him from the start, now gave him small nods of respect when Tom's ideas worked. Yet beyond the shipyard, a greater event was approaching. The Galactic Summit was to be held on Starhaven Station. Leaders, merchants, and nobles from across the stars would gather to discuss trade, alliances, and disputes. For Zarek, this summit was important, but it also carried danger. Rivals watched him closely, jealous of his power and wealth. Some sought to weaken him, and others simply waited for a mistake. On the day of the summit, the Grand Hall of Starhaven was filled with light. Flags and banners of many worlds hung from the ceiling. Tables were covered with food from across the galaxy. Voices filled the chamber as delegates argued, bargained, and tried to win favor. At the center of it all stood Zarek, his silver skin shining under the lights, his presence commanding silence whenever he raised his hand. Tom was there too, standing quietly near the edge of the hall. Zarek had invited him not as a worker, but as a guest. For Tom, it was overwhelming. Never before had he seen so many powerful beings in one place. He felt small, but the bracelet on his wrist gave him strength. At first, the summit moved smoothly. Trade agreements were made, disputes settled. But then a voice rose from the crowd. It belonged to a tall alien noble draped in rich robes, his eyes sharp with envy. "Zarek," the noble said, pointing toward Tom. "Who is this human you bring among us? He wears a bracelet that belongs to your house. Such a treasure cannot belong to a poor worker. He must have stolen it." The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to Tom. He felt his chest tighten and his hands trembled. Zarek's gaze turned cold. "Choose your words carefully," he warned. But the noble pressed on. "I speak only the truth. That bracelet is marked with your seal. If he is no thief, explain how such an object of power sits on his wrist. Unless you mean to say that a human laborer is worthy of the wealth of stars." Whispers spread through the hall. Some nodded in agreement, others watched curiously. Tom felt heat rise in his face. He wanted to speak, but his voice failed him. Finally, he stepped forward and raised his hand. "It was not stolen," he said, his voice steady though quiet. "It was given to my family long ago. I do not know why, but my grandmother told me to protect it always. It is all I have left of her." The noble laughed. "A story with no proof. Words of a worker mean nothing here." Tom lowered his head, shame filling him. But before he could retreat, Zarek stepped forward. His voice rang through the hall with strength that silenced the whispers. "There is proof," Zarek declared, "for I am the one who gave the bracelet to his family." The hall froze. Every eye turned to him. Zarek's voice grew deeper, carrying not only authority but memory. "Many years ago, when I was hunted and weak, I found refuge on a small blue world called Earth. A human family risked themselves to protect me. They gave me shelter, food, and kindness when I had nothing to repay them with. To honor them, I gave this bracelet, my seal, as a promise that their family would never be forgotten. That bracelet is not stolen. It is the most honest possession in this hall. Gasps rose from the crowd. The noble's face twisted with disbelief. You expect us to believe that one of the greatest billionaires of the galaxy was saved by mere humans? Zarek's eyes burned. Believe it or not, it is the truth. Without that family, I would not stand here today. Without their courage, I would have been destroyed before any of you knew my name. And this man, Tom, is their descendant. The bracelet proves it, and I will not allow anyone to stain that truth with lies. For the first time, Tom looked up. His heart pounded. He had always wondered about the bracelet, about the stories his grandmother had told him. Now, in front of the galaxy's leaders, the truth was revealed. His family had once saved a life that changed history. The noble tried again. Even if this story is true, what worth does one human have in matters of the galaxy? Zarak turned sharply toward him. Worth is not measured in riches or power. Worth is measured in honor, in loyalty, and courage. Humans may be young among the stars, but they have hearts that cannot be bought. This man stands as proof, the crowd murmured. Some nodded in agreement, others looked uncertain, but none dared challenge Zarak further. His words carried too much weight, his reputation too strong. Tom felt the hall's eyes upon him, but for the first time he did not feel small. He stood straighter, holding his wrist up so the bracelet gleamed in the light. My grandmother always said it was a gift for something our family did long ago, Tom said quietly. I never knew what it meant, now I do, and I will not dishonor it. The silence that followed was powerful. Then slowly applause began. It spread through the hall until even those who had doubted clapped their hands or tapped their claws on the tables. The sound filled the chamber like thunder. Zarak placed his hand on Tom's shoulder. You see, he said softly, the promise was not forgotten. Your family's honor lives through you. That night, the summit ended with new respect given not only to Zarak but to humanity. Many who had once dismissed humans as weak now saw them differently. They saw a people capable of loyalty so strong it could shape the destiny of stars. Tom walked back to his quarters in silence, the events of the day heavy in his mind. He felt changed. No longer was he just a poor worker. He was part of a story that reached across generations, a story of courage and honor. The bracelet on his wrist felt warmer now, as if alive with meaning. From a balcony above, Zarak watched him go. In his heart, he felt pride, not just for Tom, but for the entire human race. The galaxy had seen the truth, and though challenges would come, a seed of respect had been planted. And that seed, Zarak knew, would one day grow into something greater. The day after the summit, the station was still buzzing with talk of what had happened. Everywhere Tom walked, he heard whispers. Some spoke with curiosity, others with respect, and a few with envy. But one thing was clear. The story of the human family that saved Zarak had spread like fire across the stars. Tom tried to remain humble, but he could feel the change. No longer was he invisible. Delegates nodded at him in the halls. Workers smiled at him as he passed. Even the engineers who once mocked him now treated him as one of their own. Yet Tom did not let pride blind him. He still remembered the long years of hunger and loneliness, the quiet nights on the station where he spoke only to the stars. He knew honor was not about being seen, but about what one chose to do when no one was watching. Zarak, however, had greater plans. In the days following the summit, he called Tom to his private chamber. The room was lined with star screens, each showing a different world. Wealth and power radiated from every corner, but Zarak's expression was thoughtful. You know now why I gave your family the bracelet, Zarak said, his voice calm. But there is more. That bracelet is not only a seal of memory, it is a key to something that belongs to your bloodline. Tom frowned. A key? To what? Zarak stood and walked to a hidden panel in the wall. With a wave of his hand, the panel opened, revealing a crystal orb glowing with faint blue light. This, Zarak said, lifting the orb carefully, is a vault marker. Long ago, when your grandmother saved me, I hid something on Earth, something too dangerous to leave in the hands of my enemies. I gave your family the bracelet so that one day when the time was right they could find it. That time is now. Tom stared at the orb, confusion and awe mixing in his mind. But why me? I am no leader. I am just a worker. Zirak shook his head. You are more. You carry the courage of your family. You carry the heart of humanity. That is why it must be you. Tom hesitated, but the weight of Zirak's words pressed into him. Slowly, he nodded. Then I will do it. Whatever it is, I will try. The journey to Earth began the next day. Tom, Zirak, and a small crew set off aboard a sleek silver ship. As the engines roared and the stars blurred past, Tom felt a deep pull in his chest. For years he had lived far from his homeworld. Now he was returning, but not as the forgotten worker he once was. He was returning with purpose. When the ship entered Earth's orbit, Tom pressed his face to the window. The blue oceans and white clouds stretched below. His heart ached with memories of childhood, of his grandmother's gentle hands, of the stories she told by the fire. They landed in a quiet valley, far from the cities. Guided by the orb and the bracelet, Tom led the way through forests and rocky hills. The air smelled of earth and leaves, so different from the recycled air of space. For a moment he simply stood still, breathing deeply, grounding himself in the world of his birth. After days of travel, they reached a cave hidden by vines. Inside, the walls glowed faintly as if touched by starlight. At the center stood a sealed chamber, its surface covered in alien symbols. Tom raised his wrist, and the bracelet shone. The chamber responded, lines of light spreading across the stone until it opened with a slow rumble. Inside was no treasure of gold or jewels. Instead, a device rested on a pedestal. It was simple yet powerful, humming with quiet energy. Zirak stepped forward, his voice heavy with memory. This is the stellar beacon, a device that can call across the galaxy. It can summon fleets, create alliances, or even warn of danger. In the wrong hands, it could bring war. In the right hands, it can bring unity. Tom's breath caught. And you want me to have it? Zirak nodded. It was hidden for your family. Only you could open it. The beacon belongs to humanity now. Tom touched the device. It felt warm, alive, as if it recognized him. Images filled his mind, worlds connected, people working together, hope spreading across the stars. He pulled his hand back, shaken. I do not know if I am ready for this, Tom whispered. Zirak placed a firm hand on his shoulder. No one is ever ready, but you will learn. Just as your grandmother learned to show kindness to a stranger from the stars, you will learn to carry this gift. They returned to the ship with the beacon. Word spread quickly, and soon Earth itself buzzed with wonder. For centuries, humans had looked up at the stars, dreaming of their place among them. Now, through Tom, they had been given a voice. The Galactic Council called another meeting, this time with humanity as a guest of honor. Leaders from across the stars gathered once more. Tom stood at the front, the beacon in his hands, his heart beating like a drum. When silence fell, he spoke. His words were simple, but they carried weight. My family once saved a stranger because it was the right thing to do. We did not ask for reward. We did not know he would become a leader among the stars. We only knew that kindness matters. Now I stand before you with a gift that could change the galaxy. I do not offer it for power. I do not claim it for myself. I offer it as a promise that humanity will stand with those who seek peace and unity. We may be small among the stars, but our hearts are not small. Our courage is not small. And our future will not be small. The hall erupted in sound. Some cheered, some argued, but none could ignore the message. Humanity, once forgotten, had stepped into the light. From that day forward, Earth was no longer seen as a quiet backwater. Ambassadors came, alliances were made, and respect grew. Some feared humanity's rise, but many welcomed it. They saw in humans a strength not of weapons or wealth, but of spirit. Tom returned to Earth often, but he also traveled among the stars. He worked with builders, healers, and explorers, carrying the beacon's message. In time, he became known as the voice of humanity. Yet he never forgot his roots. He still visited the small home where his grandmother once told stories, still walked the valleys where he first held the beacon. Zerak remained at his side, watching with quiet pride. The bond between them was no longer one of debt but of friendship. Together they built bridges that spanned worlds. Years later, when Tom stood once more at the summit hall, he was no longer the shy worker who had once hidden in the shadows. He was a leader, not because of titles or wealth, but because he had carried the honor of his people with honesty. And as he looked out over the gathered leaders, he spoke the words that would be remembered for generations. Humans are not perfect. We make mistakes, we struggle, we fall. But we also rise. We rise again and again because hope is written in us. That is what we bring to the galaxy. That is our gift. The applause that followed shook the hall. Tom knew then that his grandmother's words had come true. The bracelet was not just a memory of the past. It was a bridge to the future. And through it, humanity had claimed its place among the stars. The galaxy had seen the worth of humankind. And from that day forward, no one would ever again call Earth small.